All right, here we go. Final reflection for design thinking class EDL 655. This is Emily Halbig, and I'm going to be talking to you today about my project that I created with my group, the Trauma Tree. This presentation I'm calling Creating a Culture of Compassion. So I want to start out with a quote by Frederick Douglass. It's easier to build strong children than to repair broken men. This quote was in the restorative justice book, that the first one that I read. I think it was just Intro to Restorative Justice for Schools. It was like right on the first page, and it hit me as a good one. I feel like I would use that to maybe introduce these ideas to my staff when I become an administrator. So when we began the design thinking process in the first lesson, the first webinar, I remember that Dr. Ward emphasized empathy. And when she started talking to us about the process and how we would have to come up with a topic, when she talked about empathy, it made complete sense for me to go in the direction of restorative practices, which is something that over the past 6 months or so throughout this program and just on a personal level, I've been super interested in. And, I've really kind of built my leadership platform around compassion and empathy and restorative practices. Looking at empathy, I put down that I was interested in studying restorative justice, and I was grouped up with 3 other amazing professionals, future administrators, Hillary Gaddis, Emily Haskell, and May Saturn. And the work that we did this semester, I have to say, I'm super proud of it. It was probably the best team project, collaborative effort that I've ever participated in. Every person on my team was very responsive and collaborative and participatory in the process. And at the beginning, when we started kind of differentiating our skills, we all wanted to do research and we all wanted to provide information, but I really enjoyed that during this process, I got to use a lot of my creativity and my design skills as well. So why restorative justice? For me, there's been kind of a confluence of 3 things over the course of the last year that has led me to restorative justice. And the first is that I took the 610 course with Dr. Pumpian. And in that course, reading some of the texts opened my eyes to the importance of creating a positive school culture. And in particular, the do no harm pillar resonated with me because I've been in environments where the school climate is very positive, and I can see the effects it has on kids wanting to come to school every day, wanting to do their best work. But one of the other factors this year was that I was working in a middle school with a very toxic culture, and the discipline system was very punitive. Kids were sent to the office for referrals for minor offenses, given serious consequences. They were sitting in the office for hours at a time, missing class. The hours of missed instruction was a concern to me, as well as just the long-term harm that we were causing by continuing to suspend students who really were just making a lot of judgment errors. The biggest problem at my school was substance abuse. There wasn't a lot of fighting. There weren't kids bringing weapons to school. Nobody was really being put at harm, but kids were bringing marijuana to school and alcohol. And rather than going down the path of trying to help these students and work together as a team to change their behaviors, they just kept getting suspended over and over. And of course, what is a kid going to do who gets suspended for substance abuse, not coming to school the next day? They're going to probably just stay home and get high, right? So I don't see how that solves the problem. So those 2 things. And then, I became keenly aware of what was going on because I created a little group of students that I called the Chrome Squad, and I taught them how to take Chromebooks apart. It was a 1-to-1 Chromebook school, so we had a lot of kids with keys that were missing or disconnected, LCD screens or different things. And rather than sending it out and paying for repair, I taught some of these teens to take them apart and fix them, and it was really empowering for them. These are kids I chose specifically that were not academically successful and that struggled with their behavior and were sent out of class often. And I really wanted to give them something positive reason to come to school. And they were great at it. They took it seriously. They were very appreciative of being given an opportunity. But unfortunately, over the course of that school year, 3 of the kids in that program ended up becoming expelled. And it was just for repeated offenses of bringing alcohol and marijuana to school. So that for me was why, I became interested in restorative justice and why I was really excited to build my capstone project around restorative justice. So during the discovery phase, we really just wanted to identify some of the problems we were dealing with and ask questions about that and come up with a design challenge question. So in our brainstorming, some of the problems that we were dealing with, not just myself, but other teachers, is the lack of empathy at school, defiance, suspension, expulsion, unhealthy relationships, toxic culture. We also discussed the school to prison pipeline. In my community, 99% free and reduced lunch, almost all Latino kids, first generation, the majority of them. So fortunately, in my migrant rural community, these kids weren't really being exposed to the gang culture as much as in other parts of town, but still recognizing that by suspending them and expelling them, we are contributing to more, that they're going to have more of a chance to end up in prison or juvenile detention or something. So we wanted to work on that. Our end users, we had quite a few of them. Obviously, the students were number one. We really wanted to focus on how to improve the school for the students. And we discussed how the community is a part of that, how the teachers are a huge part of that, school leaders, parents, and also bringing in like counselors and psychologists as part of the program. So our original challenge question, which ended up changing, was how can we positively impact the social culture of the school community and improve disciplinary outcomes through the adoption of restorative practices. We started to gather data. Hillary gave a survey to her students about school culture. We looked into, more detail about what restorative practice looked like in the classroom. What are circles? How do tier 2 and tier 3 levels support the kids who really need the most support and the ones that are coming to school with a lot of behavior problems. And then, of course, looking at those statistics, both at the local level at our schools, comparing the statistics with data across the state, and students of color typically are funneled into that prison system a lot more than their white peers. So we created a visual reminder for the question, and it was a tree that I created showing the transformation from a punitive traditional discipline system to a restorative. So you've got your fall colored leaves on the left. A lot of your words are the rules, the guilt, the punishment, punitive, things that are currently in place in some of these traditional models. And then moving towards the spring as sort of representing a growth and seeing more positive words like relationships and circles and justice and love. And this tree, though we don't keep it in its form, it actually becomes key to our design thinking product at the end. In the interpretation phase, we really wanted to take that data and research that we'd done and kind of frame our opportunities and tell a story of our end user. So when we met via a Google Hangout, looking at all those numbers and that information that we'd gathered, we were like, okay, why are we so interested in restorative practices? And then we're like, well, obviously because kids are misbehaving. Well, why are they misbehaving? Why has this become such a big problem in some of our communities? And it was Emily Haskell, who shared with us Nadine Burke's TED Talk about trauma and the effects of trauma on the brain. And Nadine also introduced us to the ACE study, Adverse Childhood Experiences, which I had already talked with Godwin Higa from Cherokee Point. We had a really great conversation for 795 where I asked him about restorative practices, and he's like, well, wait a second, we can't really talk about that until we talk about the causes, that being trauma. And, he has a trauma-informed school where all of the school personnel are trained in how to deal with kids with trauma and how to help the kids overcome some of those obstacles. So Dr. Robert Block stated that adverse childhood experiences are the single greatest unaddressed public health threat facing our nation today. And when looking at the ACE study, we determined that a vast number of kids are experiencing these adverse childhood experiences and that affects their brain. So Glenn Cook tells us that trauma restructures a child's neural network. It affects attention and memory, in addition to executive functioning skills, such as organizational skills, planning, and self regulation. So, not just the emotional aspect that kids are bringing to school, being sad, being tired, but like physically, it changes their brain in a way that they cannot absorb the material that they're learning and function at a high level. Nadine Burke tells a really interesting story in her TED Talk. Her analogy is, if you're walking in the forest and you see a bear, what your body does is it reacts by releasing hormones like adrenaline and cortisol that are going to help you either fight the bear or run from the bear. It's, the fight or flight response. And when you have that response, your body releases stress hormones, which is a good thing because it really ends up protecting you and it can save your life. The problem is that when those hormones are repeatedly released into your body, all of the chemicals create an imbalance. And as Glenn Cook described it, causes all kinds of neurological changes to happen in a student's brain that don't allow them to learn. So, talking about the bear gives me goosebumps to remember her saying it. But, she says, what happens if you go home every day and the bear is there waiting for you to get off the school bus? So what are ACEs? Well, the ACE study was done in the mid 90s. They asked 17,000 adults to talk about their childhood, and then they correlated the experiences of those adults to their current physical and mental health state, also, their behavioral state, and what they determined there's a strong connection between childhood trauma and long-term effects on the brain. We're not just talking about kids that are hungry, kids that are, struggling financially, which are damaging things as well. But ACEs are more severe: physical, sexual, and verbal abuse, neglect, having a family member who is mentally ill, a family member who's addicted to drugs or alcohol, having a family member who's in prison, losing a parent, or witnessing a mother being abused. And going back to talking about my Chrome Squad students, this one sweet, wonderful girl who I just adore, 14 years old, one of 11 kids, on this list, 4 of those things I know for sure she's experienced. So she's already at such a disadvantage. And I feel it's our duty as administrators to recognize that and to ask the child, what is it that you need from us to help you in this situation? And unfortunately, in her situation, nobody who was a decision maker asked those questions. I asked those questions. I became very close with her and built trust with her, but I was excluded from the process every single time she was in the office. Nobody invited me in to have a conversation with how we could support her in making better choices. And that is what I feel needs to change. I think that we all need to work together to help the students. So we created our Defeating Trauma story. And the beginning, we talk about what trauma looks like. And then I gave the case study, one about Carla, another about my student Enrique, similar experiences, not quite as severe, but both who ended up being expelled because the system did not support them. We also brought in the prison pipeline statistics and discussed how restorative practices can support students with trauma by just creating a more positive classroom environment where students learn how to communicate, how to talk to one another about low stakes things like silly things and day-to-day things, and also really important things about what's going on at home. And though we didn't have a lot of conflict as our problems at my school, in schools where there is a lot of fighting and a lot of conflict, I think this is really necessary in bringing that down, because kids start to see each other as potentially allies and not enemies. And then that led us into the ideation phase. And we started brainstorming tons and tons of ideas about, what we could do as potential school leaders and also within our current sphere of influence to bring about changes in our schools. And we asked a bunch of questions. How might we identify trauma? How might we create a culture of restoration and peace? How might we train our staff? How might we use personalized learning to encourage solutions, get the students involved, have them learning about what we can do and presenting ideas and projects to their peers about this issue or whatever issues in the community are causing problems for the kids. And ultimately, what we really want to do is impact a society that incurs less trauma. And beginning with children in the schools, if this became a movement where this was recognized as a serious problem and something that we had to overcome and address, it would benefit our society, our entire culture in hundreds of ways. Everything would just become better, less fighting, less violence, less kids going to prison, less drug abuse problems, so many things. So in this phase is when we came up with our three-tiered approach to supporting students or to creating that compassionate culture. The first tier, the bottom tier, is understanding trauma, teaching the teachers about trauma, talking about everything I've been talking about here, the effects on the brain, having them watch TED Talks, having them learn about what their kids are going through. Community awareness we felt was really key. Also, just kind of bringing the community and the school together as a way to recognize, like, we all want to support the kids and provide the best for the kids. So how can we do that? And providing support and resources to families that need it. And then, of course, the third tier being the restorative practices inside the classroom. So throughout that week and that process, we changed our challenge question to it's a little more general and also brings in the trauma as more of the foundation than instead of the restorative practices. So we said, how can we change the culture of our schools to improve outcomes for students with trauma? And that became our final question. In the experimentation phase, we started to come up with our prototype, our product. We knew that we wanted to have a graphic, and so what we did was we took that tree that I created earlier in the semester, and we changed the tree. Instead of showing the progression from punitive to restorative, we changed it to show our three-tiered approach. And once we created the graphic, we then said, well, how can we make it better? We got feedback about providing resources around this. So we created a thing link, and the thing link links to a bunch of different videos and articles providing more information about each of our subjects. And then we also, we wanted to hang the poster in classrooms and around school. So we added a QR code to the poster that when you scan the QR code, it takes you to that thing link. And you can see that each of those little circles on each of the leaves takes us to a different resource. In the evolution phase, which we're still in, we've been reflecting on our process moving forward. And what we've really discussed in this phase is the importance of creating an open source version of our product. And what we wanted, we were all inspired by the RNDIY, the apartment gardens, window gardens idea, and how we could potentially open this up so that people can edit it, like translate the leaves to Spanish or another language, or differentiate the resources on the trees for younger children versus secondary kids, or any other way that somebody else might see fit that the four of us didn't come up with. So we created a Weebly, and on the Weebly we put the image up, and we had the image linked to different pages of resources. We also put a blog component on there because we really wanted to have teachers come in and give ideas, feedback, and potentially take the image, run with it, do something else to it, and bring it back to us to share with a larger community. We also recognize the importance of social media and our personal learning networks, and so we created a Gmail account, a Pinterest, and a Twitter account around the trauma tree. So in closing, I want to go back to Dr. Burke because she really inspired a lot of our work and has inspired me tremendously in my future as a school leader. And she said, the single most important thing we need today is the courage to look this problem in the face and say this is real and this is all of us. And what I hope to do is not only in my sphere of influence locally to make a change, I would love to see something like this, just the embracing of empathy and compassion and understanding children take more of a forefront, and in particular in middle school where kids are going through so much change in their bodies and their brains. So links to some resources that I used in the presentation, And finally, if you have any questions, you may contact me through Twitter, email, or on my website, emilyhalbig.com. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed this course. It was super challenging. I feel thankful for having such a wonderful team, but I really got a lot out of this class. I feel like I'm going to use a lot and hopefully bring to my district and encourage other school leaders to use it. So thank you very much.